Hey guys, what's up? It's iFlynn here, and today I'm going to be showing you guys an Akstiletto Prime build, just so you guys can use it and kill things with it. That's basically like why I'm showing builds and stuff like that. So, I mean, if you have the Akstiletto Prime or even just normal Akstiletto, then this is the build that you want to use, at least in my opinion. There's a lot of different ways to mod the Akstilettos. You can even, like, put in a little less effort if you really want to and only throw on the dual stat 60% mods if you really want to. You'll get more like DPS out of those if you're going up against like armored enemies, like you want to strip the armor away. That's totally fine as well. Basically, to explain the build, we have our Hornet Strike, Barrel Diffusion, and Lethal Torrent. This is our free main damage mods, and then we mod for our crit damage, primed target cracker, Prime Pistol Gambit, and then we threw on our elemental damage mods, Pathogen Runs and Convulsion. Of course, these can be swapped out for whatever based on the enemies that you're going up against. So if you're going against Bombards, you want to run radiation damage, so that's combining Convulsion along with, I believe it's called Heated Charge or Primed Heated Charge on pistols. So you just throw that there, and there you go, you get radiation damage instead of corrosive damage. And then you have one extra mod slot here, which you can basically throw whatever you want on. So you can throw on Hydraulic Crosshairs like I had, or you can throw on another element. So let's say you're going up against heavy gunners, you want to have more damage versus them, you throw on corrosive and fire, which will give you 75% bonus damage from the corrosive damage, and then an extra 25% bonus damage from the heated charge or the primed heated charge or whatever. And that is basically it. I run hydraulic crosshairs in that spot because, I mean, hydraulic crosshairs is just kind of my go-to most of the time. So let me just go ahead and throw convulsion back on here. So that's basically that. And like I said, you could run the dual stat elemental mods. So in regards to electric damage, you'd be running Jolt, and then whenever it comes to your infested damage or your toxin damage, sorry, you'd be running Pistol Pestilence. So you just basically swap Pistol Pestilence or Pathogen Runs for Pistol Pestilence and then Convulsion for Jolt, and then you'd have your dual stat elementals, and then this would allow you to strip armor more effectively versus those heavy gunners and bombards and stuff like that if you were going down the line of like stripping armor from enemies with this particular type of weapon. So of course there is other ways in the game to strip armor, which is why I go with this build. So for example, 9 times out of 10, if I'm playing with a group of players who are like master rank 10 or above, most of them have corrosive projection, so I just go with these builds because it gives higher numbers in terms of like your base raw damage, and you're more likely to one-shot an enemy at that point because they have no armor, so there's no point really modding for status chance in the form of corrosive, if that makes any sense. So yeah, so let's just go ahead and show you guys the actual DPS versus a level 150 heavy gunner with the actual what's it called, with the 90% elemental mods. So let's just go ahead and spawn them in level 150, and that is basically that. Simulate like so, and then I'm going to turn on my shatter shield so I don't die, shoot his head, and then keep on shooting his head, and look how fast his health kind of goes down. So even though we're not running those dual stat elemental mods, we're still proccing our status effects quite often, right? So if you want to take a look at the status chance here, we have a 63.2% status chance. If we want to go ahead and swap out our stuff here, so let's just go ahead and throw on that there and that there. This would be the type of build that you'd be running if you were going for the armor strip type build. So let's just see the DPS versus this guy now. So you see that we're doing considerably less damage in terms of just the raw numbers, but we're killing them in more or less the same time because we're like stripping that armor away more often, if that makes any sense. So it doesn't really matter which one of those builds you go for, you're still going to kill them in more or less the same amount of time. I just like having the bigger raw numbers and having it polarized for the bigger numbers because, like, that means if I really wanted to, I could, run viral damage, for example. So just swap that there. Put Pathogen Rounds in place for Convulsion, put on Deep Freeze, and here's my viral damage. And that means if I were to strip the enemy's armor away, like for example, if I were to play Ash and you used a Seeking Shuriken build, for example, and then actually make ourselves look half decent. For some reason, my Ash hasn't got any colors on. That's kind of weird. There we go. Go ahead and make these look the same. Go ahead and spawn this guy in. And because he will have no armor because we're stripping it away, this guy will die super quick. So there you go. Removing that armor is very beneficial, so you can do basically whatever you want whenever it comes to the Akstilettos, and they're still going to be relatively insane in terms of DPS, right? armored enemy, unarmored enemy, doesn't really matter. You're going to be dealing a load of damage versus them, and it just makes sense to sort of run this type of build, like a hybrid, potentially in status and crit, or just running your 90% damage mods. Personally, like I said, 90% damage mods are the go-to for me, because if I'm running a full group of cruise projections, there's no real need for me to be proccing that status, because enemies are going to be dying really fast anyway. And by the time it gets to the point where I'm relying on status procs to sort of kill the enemies for me, you're not going to be wanting to play the game anymore anyway, because you'd be like, I don't know, like super deep into survival. The enemies would be like level 3 fuzzing, and it just wouldn't be beneficial. And then that way you'd be like putting a full magazine into the enemies, and then you'd have to let like your viral proc or your slash proc or whatever kind of do the work in the enemies to finish them off, if that makes any sense. And it would just take way too long, and it wouldn't be any fun. Like at that point, you're better off just using like covert lethality builds on like a Naros or Equinox or Ivara or something, and that makes a hell of a lot more sense, if that makes any sense to you guys. So yeah, so 90% damage mods, in my opinion, is what you want to be running here. So if I just go ahead and make the build properly, so here we go, hydraulic crosshairs, and then that is basically what I use most of the time on my Akstiletto primes. You can use this on the normal Akstilettos. Of course, you're going to get a little bit less damage, but this is the standard crit build for most pistols. So you're going to run this exact same build on things like the Aximati, the Pandero, the Dual Toxicist if you're running that on Mesa for the Frenzy passive at least. And you can also use a variation of this build, like you just remove hydraulic crosshairs and throw on primed heated charge over here, and this would be the type of build that you would use if you were running like a Peacemaker Mesa build, right? Because, you know, obviously hydraulic crosshairs doesn't proc when you're using Peacemaker, so it doesn't make any sense to have that on. But if you're just using the weapon on its own, it makes sense to have hydraulic crosshairs on, because it's going to give you more DPS, right? 145% extra crit chance whenever you're getting a headshot as you're aiming. Just makes a hell of a lot more sense in my opinion. So that is basically that. But other than that, guys, that is it for this video. If you guys enjoyed it, go ahead, hit that like button below. If you want to see more Warframe content from me, hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.